Okay, welcome back for our second demonstration of an AI app. This one's more sophisticated. The first one was really designed so that you can see what's happening very easily for a simple application, but also because this is on Git, you can download it yourself and even create your own application from it that might be somewhat similar. This one's a little more complex. It does things like transformations. So we also want to do it the same way. We want to show you this application running and then Nick will show you what's happening underneath it all. So why don't you take it away, Nick?
Absolutely. So this one is predicting heart disease. We've written it up here in the blog post. And this one is also going over a little bit about what we're doing inside of our application. It's doing a few transformations in terms of feature engineering before we ever hit our model, which is a little bit more in line with what you would see in a real world scenario, as opposed to just taking values from a slider. So we'll go ahead and we'll hop into the application and take a look at what we're doing. Again, we're here at the MLRun AI apps, the hosted one on Heroku, which you can get to from the GitHub page or the blog. So under the dropdown, we're going to go to the heart disease app, and that'll pull up our application. So right off the bat, there is this image that shows what we're actually doing behind the scenes. So we have a few steps in terms of transformations. One is a value mapping, for example, turning age from a number into a category, and then one hot encoding all of our categories into zeros and ones that our model can understand. Then we're just going to put that into the format that our model server expects and then send it to the model. So all of this is happening in real time using real-time transformations and MLRun inferencing graphs. So again, we have a bunch of values. These are drop downs and sliders and what have you, but really we're just getting data from a user. We're going to go ahead and press predict, and we get a response back. And in this case, we get a happy heart. So this particular person does not have heart disease. Like before, the application is not the most exciting part of what we're showing here, but rather the actual behind the scenes inferencing and deployment. So in terms of inferencing, very much like before, we are getting data from the user. And again, this is live updates. If I were to change this from flat to downsloping, press predict, flat now became downsloping. And we're sending it either to the mock server or our production model at some sort of HTTP endpoint. Exactly like before, there's really no change in how we're interacting with the model. The only real change is what the model is doing behind the scenes. So to show that, we'll go into the deployment section. And this one's a little bit more complex than before. So what we're doing again, we're importing our model server, but then we're adding things to what we call the graph. And the graph is like a DAG, a directed acyclic graph. It's just a series of steps that runs. In this case, it happens in real time. So we're adding things to the graph, which are Python functions and Python classes that do something. Again, those are running through our transformations. We add all those things to the graph. We can print it out, and we get that diagram we saw at the beginning. We also have a few configuration and helper functions in here for those mappings that we're doing. But really all we're doing, import our function, add things to the graph, and again, like before, do .deploy or to .mock server. All that's going to package it up. It's going to take the code. It's going to take your configuration. It's going to take your model. It's going to take the graph, put it all into one thing, deploy it on top of Kubernetes, and then again, we can interact with it exactly the same as before.
And the cool part of this is you're building this transformation pipeline by just basically adding the steps and then referencing the steps and then pushing it out to the server instead of you having to write all the code all within your application. And these become reusable, right? These are functions that can be reused by others, but it's a nice way to organize, and it's a nice way to get reuse out of it. And you can change it pretty quickly without having to write any other code if you have different types of steps you want to add.
Exactly. And one last thing I wanted to touch on before we round out the video is the way we built this particular graph. This is not the default behavior, but what we're actually returning is each different step of the graph, and you can see how it's changing over time. So for example, this is our original data that we sent. It's exactly like it was on the sliders. And then we were mapping a value. So this age of 62 became a value of adult. And then we're doing things like one-hot encoding, turning all these values into zeros and ones. And you can see in each step of the graph, we're changing the data in some way. And then we're sending that to our model to get a response back. So you can see visually here, you can explore and do all your drop downs and such, and see how the data is actually changing over time and interact with the application that way.
Yeah, it looks great.
So if you're interested in learning more, we strongly recommend you check out the blog post, which goes into a lot more detail about what we're doing, and check out the source code itself, download it, play around, and submit a pull request. We'd love to see more AI apps in production.
Great. Thanks a lot, Nick.